All right, let's just get right into it. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to completely deconstruct the anatomy of a genius. Today, we're tackling the absolute ultimate question surrounding Lionel Messi. What exactly makes him the undisputed greatest of all time? And look, we aren't just going to sit here and watch his highlight reel. We are diving into the hard data, the historical comparisons, and even the literal molecular sports science to figure out how this guy completely conquered the footballing world.
To really understand the absolute peak of his career, we actually have to go back to the 2022 Qatar World Cup. And there's this fantastic, super humanizing little anecdote from the Game magazine about it. So the defining image of that entire tournament is Messi, right? Hoisted up on his teammates' shoulders, massive smile on his face, holding up that iconic golden trophy. But here is the crazy secret. It wasn't even the real World Cup. He was actually holding this carefully made, gold-plated replica that belonged to two fans in the crowd who had managed to pass it down to the players. But you know what? It literally didn't even matter. What mattered to Messi in that moment wasn't the authenticity of the medal in his hands. It was what that moment represented for his legacy.
So here's our roadmap for today. First up, the World Cup crown. Second, 47 career trophies. Third, the science of Messi. Fourth, comparing football eras. And finally, settling the GOAT debate. Okay, Section 1, the World Cup crown. Completing the set.
Let's start right at the very top with that massive cultural moment in Qatar, where he finally secured the one trophy he truly coveted to complete his collection. I mean, think about it. Before 2022, Messi had already won almost everything conceivable. We're talking 11 domestic league titles, 4 Champions Leagues, 7 Ballons d'Or, and a Copa America. But there was always this lingering, heavy narrative that to truly be the greatest, he had to win the World Cup. He was basically carrying the weight of an entire football-obsessed nation on his shoulders. So after 16 years and 5 grueling attempts, he finally achieved his dream. That unbridled ecstasy on his face in Qatar, that was the look of a man finally shedding a decades-long burden.
Moving on to Section 2, 47 career trophies, the unmatched hardware.
Let's see how all of this builds into an objective look at his sheer statistical dominance. 47. I just want you to pause and let that number actually sink in for a second. This represents the absolute world record total of career trophies Lionel Messi has accumulated over his 2 decades as a professional. No player in the history of the men's game has ever won more team hardware. Period.
When you break those numbers down, that 35-trophy chunk he won at FC Barcelona is just visually staggering. It's a completely unprecedented era of single-club dominance. But the crazy thing is, it didn't stop there. He immediately made an impact by grabbing 3 trophies at Paris Saint-Germain, he captured 6 massive titles with the Argentine national team, and then he crossed the Atlantic to instantly bring Inter Miami the first 3 trophies in their entire club's history. The guy is quite literally a walking championship.
Which brings us to Section 3, the science of Messi, biomechanics and polar coordinate analysis.
Okay, we're going to zoom way in now. We know he wins, but how does he actually do it on a mechanical level? To understand this, we have to look at this concept called laterality. Now, we normally just think of players as being either right-footed or left-footed, right? But true laterality is about how a player uses their entire body in space. For Messi, he heavily relies on his non-dominant right leg, not really to kick, but to provide this incredible stability and balance. Basically, his right foot acts as an anchor, creating this rock-solid base so his dominant left foot can execute highly complex, pinpoint actions like dribbling and shooting.
If you look at the ultra-offensive areas on the right side of the pitch, the data reveals something super interesting. Despite being famously left-footed, Messi statistically prefers to occupy the right midfield and the right wing. Why would he do that? Well, because by attacking from the right side, he naturally opens up a much wider shooting angle for that dominant left foot. He is mathematically playing the angles before he even touches the ball.
And researchers have actually run a polar coordinate analysis on this, mapping exactly how Messi's specific body angles and turns either activate or inhibit his scoring opportunities. They literally mapped out the exact direction his chest was facing during successful goal sequences just to understand the raw mechanics of his movement. It's like your geometric cheat code. So the crucial point the data revealed is this highly specific biomechanical trick. When Messi faces the goal, he intentionally angles his body to the right and frequently uses the outside of his right foot. This seemingly simple movement tricks defenders into shifting their weight to the right, which instantly opens up a massive pocket of space on his deadly left side. It's literally a physiological trap that he sets over and over and over again.
The study even traced his exact steps during a sprint. When he receives the ball, he generally takes just 1 to 3 short touches. He uses the inside of his foot to gain control, and then the outside of his foot to gain speed and propel himself forward.
But what's really fascinating here is that he rarely ever executes full 180 or 360-degree turns. Instead, he uses these super short touches and tiny changes of direction to create a zigzag sprint. He simply gives defenders the sensation that he's going to turn fully, entirely tricking them and throwing them off balance, all while maintaining his forward momentum.
All right, Section 4. Comparing football eras, the rivals and predecessors.
Let's pull back from the microscience for a minute and look at the macro picture. How does this totally unique, scientifically proven playing style stack up against his ultimate rival? Because let's be honest, you can't talk about Messi without talking about Cristiano Ronaldo. They've given us arguably the greatest head-to-head battle in modern sports history. But what makes it so endlessly fascinating is the absolute contrast in their physical realities. Messi is often described as this diminutive, open-field magician, creating space like a yo-yo on a string. It's a pure art form of precision. Ronaldo, on the other hand, is viewed as this statuesque, relentless assassin, a machine built by design for aerial superiority and sheer power. It's basically Picasso versus a perfectly engineered sports car, two completely different ways to dominate the exact same sport.
And when we look back even further, journalists point out how historical genius in this sport always took different forms. You have Diego Maradona, an intense creative artist where his genius was inextricably tied to a certain madness on the pitch. You've got Johan Cruyff, the philosopher footballer, who wanted everyone to really think about the game intellectually. Then there's Pelé, the nostalgic king who dominated a completely different bygone era of the sport. And of course, the modern era, with Ronaldo's incredible, almost corporate efficiency. Comparing these legends is so fascinating precisely because they all represent such vastly different facets of greatness.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, Settling the GOAT Debate, Objective Supremacy. So, with all that history, all that nuance, how do we actually settle the debate? Well, beyond the 8 Ballons d'Or and beyond those insane single-season records, like scoring 91 goals in 2012, which is still just unbelievable, it ultimately comes down to winning. When we rank the top players by total trophies, Messi mathematically sits entirely alone at the peak of football's hardware mountain with 47 titles. Look at how far he outpaces his peers, his predecessors, and even his ultimate rivals.
But as we wrap up this explainer, I do want to leave you with this final, honestly somewhat impossible question that analysts always raise. Can we ever truly compare the grainy, black and white footage of someone like Alfredo Di Stefano from the 1950s to the ultra-high-definition 4K broadcasts of Lionel Messi today? Like, are we even evaluating the same sport anymore, or are we just evaluating our own nostalgia? The stats say Messi is the greatest. The science shows exactly how he pulls it off, but the true beauty of football is that this debate will probably echo on forever. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the anatomy of a genius. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.